Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Now a lot of Star Wars fans know that the Coruscant Reformation completely demilitarized the Republic, which is why it's in the state it is when the Clone Wars started. But what a lot of people don't realize is despite the fact that the Republic was demilitarized, it didn't mean that the galaxy was completely defenseless. You still had a diverse group of planetary defense forces, corporate security, and regional militias of all shapes and sizes. And at the federal level, you also had the Jedi Guardians and the Judicial forces that were oftentimes deployed alongside one another. In times of great danger, the Jedi Guardians and Judicials would actually organize several different local defense groups to respond to a threat, like the Stark Hyperspace War. While these mismatched units might not have performed as well as a professional army would, they were significantly cheaper to maintain during peacetime, which during this period was all the time. Now, a ruthless authoritarian dictator like Palpatine was all about seizing power, and so any entity that was either independent or opposed to him was seen as a problem, especially if they were armed. The Jedi were the most obvious threat, and the Clone Wars was specifically engineered to lead up to Order 66. The Judicial Forces, on the other hand, was full of individuals who actually really wanted to serve in the military but had no other outlets at the federal level, and so a lot of these guys were actually given officer commissions within the Grand Army of the Republic during the outset of the Clone Wars, and a lot of people took those positions. The Republic Senate was another factor that Palpatine had to watch out for, and it would be forced to cede quite a lot of power to the executive branch in the name of protecting the Republic from the Separatist crisis. Now, Palpatine's goal and vision included him getting his hands on almost everything. Now, there is one last part of the security infrastructure that we haven't talked about, and that is rarely talked about both in Star Wars and on lore channels like mine, and I'm of course talking about the Senate Guard. Now, before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, ownersaber.com. This summer, all of their lightsabers are going to be 40% off and include free shipping. That includes the newly added Dark Angel, a cross-hilt lightsaber with old Republic vibes that totally won't make you look like a moody emo teenager with severe daddy issues. They also have a pretty sick replica of that if you are into it. It's rightfully called the Volatile X because Kylo Ren can't build a proper lightsaber that doesn't look like it's about to explode. Even the tiny cross-hilt blades are designed to look unstable. Really cool. You'll find all sorts of interesting lightsaber designs at ownersaber.com, including one of my favorites, the Black Moon. Yes, this is a replica of the Darksaber. It was a very unique and one-of-the-kind lightsaber that was crafted by one of the only Mandalorian Jedi to ever exist in the lore. So check out this blade and many more in the description down below if you guys are interested, and don't forget to use our promo code EWOK, that's all caps, for $15 off. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. These boys in blue were seen as the defenders of democracy. They were an elite security force whose duty was the protection of the Galactic Senate's various members and also the office of the Supreme Chancellor. They were kind of like the Secret Service of the Republic, and they worked alongside the Coruscant Security Force. This was the larger police force that basically kept peace on the surface of Coruscant, and sometimes below the surface as well. Now, while the Secret Service and most protective agencies here on Earth employed generic-looking agents wearing suits and concealed weapons of all shapes and sizes, the Senate Guard weren't just a security attachment, they were a symbol of the Republic's might and power. Next to the Jedi, they were the most visible defenders of the Republic, and they had really awesome kit to match that important responsibility. The plume helmets they wore are quite similar to what we see on Roman Praetorian Guards, who actually performed a very similar role for the Roman Empire. And so getting a position within the Senate Guard was not only extremely difficult, it was also an honor, and especially during the Coruscant Reformation when there was no standing military at all. This was basically it if you wanted to serve the Republic from a, soldiering point of view. The Senate Guard also had its own intelligence service, which gathered information on potential threats, and a special unit of Senate commandos who were amongst the most well-trained members of this organization. They could be identified by their combat armor, which didn't have ceremonial robes. The Senate Guard would also have a wide range of small arms that they would use in their job, including the DC-15, which, let's be honest, looked really good as a ceremonial rifle, but was completely useless in the confines of a ship or in any kind of CQC-style fighting. And that's because the Senate Guard was kind of an older institution, and you had a lot of people maintaining the status quo to preserve the look and legacy and image of this branch of the federal government. But since this was such a high-profile organization, the mistakes of a few could really taint the entire Senate Guard. Now, when Senator Palpatine came into power in 32 BBY, he had essentially won a recall election after Chancellor Finis Valorum was met with a vote of no confidence. Such election cycles were more chaotic, and that was because they were an emergency. They were trying to find people to replace a very important position within the federal government, and so the campaigning was extremely short. This allowed relatively unknown individuals like Senator Palpatine at the time to get his hat in the race and eventually win. Palpatine's secret was that he had a huge coalition of senators who either owed him favors or just genuinely believed in him. Palpatine was also secretly being backed by Damas Holdings, an incredibly powerful political lobby that was being run by his Sith master, Darth Plagueis. The two have been funneling money to various organizations, political interests, and even directly to senators in order to create the right political environment for Palpatine's ascension. But even if Palpatine had support of the Senate and the elite, he still had to win over the masses, who again, didn't really know him very well, so he couldn't just pass some wider regulation at this point to replace the Senate Guard. So the reforms that Palpatine wanted to make would have to wait a while, such as the nature of the secret dictator elected within a democracy. They start off by building a political base and support. Maybe they'll use some populist measures to gain that support before turning their attention on gaining power and then eventually destroying all opposition. For Chancellor Palpatine, having an apolitical organization like the Senate Guard was a big no-no. First of all, because they weren't just loyal to him, they were loyal to the Republic, and of course, Palpatine wanted to do a lot of messed up things behind closed doors. It would be relatively hard for Palpatine to get away from the Senate Guard and throw on a cloak and go talk to Maul or Darth Plagueis in secret. I mean, what if the Senate Guard found out that Palpatine was a Sith Lord, or the fact that he was creating more unrest in the Outer Rim? Surely they would have to report it to their superiors, and that would, set off a chain of events that would destroy Palpatine. And so Palpatine, for 4 years, just had to deal with the Senate Guard, until finally in 28 BBY, he would take his first steps towards destroying the Senate Guard, which he probably really hated by this time, by creating his own personal bodyguard outfit. Now, these guards were still drawn from the ranks of the Senate Guard, but they reported directly to the Chancellor's office instead of the Senate Guard. These individuals also wore crimson red robes and crimson armor. This is probably a sign of things to come. When the Empire rises, these red guards become the Empire's royal guards. By removing the Senate Guard from his own office, now he was able to move around freely and orchestrate all sorts of devious plans. But the Senate Guard still remained a problem for the Clone Wars. As more and more of Palpatine's true nature was being revealed during the conflict, senators would begin to revolt and oppose his legislation. It became clear that Palpatine would need to get rid of certain senators, something that he couldn't really do as long as the Senate Guard remained independent from his office. While replacing his own guard was seen as more of like a personal preference kind of thing, replacing the beloved Senate Guard with his own guard was something that would be harder to explain to the populace, especially because they were so trusted as an organization. And so, of course, Palpatine would have to reach into his bag of chaos and start undermining the Senate Guard secretly. Early on in the war, Viceroy Newt Gunray would be arrested as a member of the Separatist High Council. He was considered a high-priority prisoner, and since he would stand before the Republic Senate for his crimes, an entire Star Destroyer along with an attachment of elite Senate commandos were used to escort Gunray to Coruscant. And Gunray is, of course, up to his usual shenanigans and nonsense.
I am a man of great wealth, and I can be very generous to my allies.
That is a very tempting offer, Viceroy. In the meantime, I have a gift for you.
Corrupting a clone is really hard. I mean, it's happened before, but when your only family is the Republic and all the other clone troopers, betraying the Republic is like betraying yourself and your family. The Senate Guard, on the other hand, as elite as it might seem, was made up of men who lived ordinary lives. They had families, they had hobbies, they had interests outside of their professions, and yes, they could be corrupted. And in this specific case, the captain of the clone commando detachment, Pharaoh Argus, was actually on the payroll of Count Dooku. When the Republic prison convoy was intercepted by Asajj Ventress, Argus would be activated, and he would successfully help Newt Gunray escape. This was a terrible incident for the Senate Guard. Not only did it really shake trust in this organization, it destroyed the morale of this organization. Not only did Captain Argus help the Separatists get away with this crime, he also shot his own commandos that he was in charge of and fought the clone detachment on board as well. Oh, and he was also murdered by Asajj Ventress at the very end and wasn't even rewarded for his betrayal. And so we have corruption, a complete dereliction of duty, a break of that sacred trust between the commander and his men, and on top of all that, gross incompetence. The Senate Guard would crack down on corruption and try its best to vet new recruits. But that incompetence that I talked about, well, the Senate Guard just couldn't shake it. And it wasn't completely their fault. I mean, the mission they were designed to take on before the war started and the mission they were basically given when the war was in full swing was completely different. They just didn't have enough time or resources to adjust. And soon the Senate Guard would find themselves outgunned and outmanned by the threats that they would face, like the giant Zillo beast that would rampage over the Senate district. It was quickly apparent that the Jedi and clone army needed to be called in to solve the situation. The Senate Guard was also in charge of escorting the new Mandalorian's Duchess Satine Kryze from her homeworld to Coruscant, where she would testify in front of the Senate. The Senate Guard on the board were killed by a Death Watch operative, and had it not been for the clones and Jedi on board, Satine Kryze would have been killed as well. Then during the Alderaanian Refugee Conference, Padme Amidala, who was under the protection of more Senate Guard, was wounded in the arm by an assassin. The shot nearly killed her, but luckily Ahsoka Tano managed to distract the assassin Aurra Sing long enough to make her shot go wide. And then during the Naboo holiday known as Festival of Lights, or Diwali in Hanukkah by some, Chancellor Palpatine would almost be assassinated by a shape-shifting bounty hunter who disguised himself as, yes, a Senate Guard. And to make matters even worse, while the Jedi were responding to the initial attack, the remaining Senate Guardsmen who were watching over Palpatine's unconscious body were also disguised assailants. And they almost got away with Palpatine by disguising his body as, yes, a Senate Guard. It only gets worse from here, guys. I mean, it is severely embarrassing. A string of murders would occur in the Senate district and lead to the death of Senator Anaconda Farr and Senator Medici, shaking the legislative body and its trust towards the Senate Guard. And then perhaps the most embarrassing incident of them all happens when Cad Bane carries out a brazen attack on the Senate compound in the middle of the day. His goons take out several guards outside and around the building and then take a group of senators and aides, including Anakin Skywalker, hostage. This complete breakdown of security by the Senate Guard basically sealed their fate. They simply could not meet the challenges that they were forced to face. But equally as problematic was the fact that every one of these incidents I've mentioned so far has something to do with Palpatine and his knowledge of everything that's going on in the Republic. These were really calculated attacks, and I think they were orchestrated by Palpatine purposely. I mean, what else does he stand to gain from ordering an assassination of himself other than to prove that his, bodyguard detachment is completely useless? Now, Palpatine had his royal guard, hand-selected, extremely fanatic and loyal individuals who would do anything to protect him. Now, Palpatine would create a larger force that was loyal to him to protect himself from potential coups, and he would actually create this out of the clone army. An entire division would be selected from the clones and secretly trained on Coruscant. These clones didn't have your typical bounty hunter or Jedi training that would encourage them to be individuals and think for themselves. These were instead highly loyal, highly fanatic, and highly skilled clones, individuals like Commander Fox, and they would be called the Coruscant Guard. At first, they would serve alongside the Senate Guard and also the Coruscant Security Force. When it became apparent that Coruscant was no longer safe because of incidents like the Zillo Beast attack, the attack on the planet's electrical grid, or the Battle of Coruscant, the Coruscant Guard would be selected to step in and the Senate Guard would be disbanded. These Coruscant clones were trained for heavy combat, not just security duty. They were also far less susceptible to bribery and corruption. It was ultimately a really smart move by Palpatine to have a large military force in the capital that was only loyal to himself. All dictators usually need their own dedicated, loyal military force that could basically balance out the military institutions that existed long before the dictator came into power. And so before Palpatine had the Stormtroopers or the ISB and the Inquisitors, he had the boys in red, the feared Coruscant Guard. So there you have it, guys. As I told you, Palpatine has every corner covered when it came to securing his power. He is maniacal, he is evil, but he is very detail-oriented. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content.